Welcome back to Light the Fuse, the only Mission Impossible podcast that devotes a significant amount of time this week to the creation of Photoshop. Sometimes that's just how it happens.
You're not going to get that from another Mission Impossible podcast.
No. What I like about that anecdote, though, is that it was inspired by a comment that Paul Hirsch made. So we have guests talking to each other through episodes.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. It's the Light the Fuse sort of shared universe.
This is how they communicate with each other now. All these crew people. They
don't email each other. They just
they talk through us.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up because in our Making of Ghost Protocol episode,
yes,
we talked about how Top Gun Maverick is the only sequel that Tom Cruise has done outside of Mission Impossible.
But he was in a sequel to another movie.
But he was in a sequel.
So I thought about this too.
He's in Color of Money.
Yeah.
Which is a sequel to The Hustler.
He was not in The Hustler.
He's not in The Hustler. It was originally from 1961, I want to say.
Right.
It's a Paul Newman movie about
Martin Scorsese.
And then, but he didn't do the original either.
No, he didn't do the original.
But the sequel in the 80s features Tom Cruise as this very young, up and coming, awesome pool shark. Up and coming pool player. I like that movie. I haven't seen it in years, but it's shot really well, and I feel like it's got not the best reputation. But anyway, that was another sequel that Tom Cruise has done that we screwed up. I want to call us out.
Yeah, but I mean, we're talking about Tom Cruise originated.
Yes.
Project.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure he'll be in Captain America 8 at some point down the line.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't know if he will. Actually, well, he is pretty game for fun stuff.
Fun,
I mean,
yeah.
I feel like he in Rock of Ages and stuff like that. I feel like he could show up in Marvel at some point. He probably just wants to make sure he finds the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
He's sort of flirted with other blockbusters. You know, he could have been our John Carter. You know, many years ago.
Yeah. So. Can I bring up something totally crazy?
Yeah.
Do we have time? Can I bring it up?
Yeah, bring it up.
There is the novelization of the first movie.
Oh, yeah.
So we need to talk about this.
Yeah,
I know I already told you about it, but let's tell our listeners now. The novelization of the first movie, which we own, we got for like $1 on Amazon. I owned it way back in the day, too. And then I lost it at some point, so I had to rebuy it. But this person, James Swallow, emailed us about this. The novelization to the first movie actually has 2 sequel books.
Well, were they actually produced?
That's a good question.
It sounds like they were maybe like commissioned, but never. Anyway, go ahead. Tell the story.
He says, you're already aware of the 1996 movie novelization by Peter Barsuccini. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's a scriptwriter as well as a tie-in writer, known for movies like Drop Zone and lots of stuff from the High School Musical series. His novelization of Mission Impossible came out in June of 96, a month after the movie. This is James Swallow talking. As I understand it, in the 90s, the typical deal with pocketbooks and a movie licensor was to contract the rights to publish 3 books, an adaptation of the movie script with the option to produce 2 more original tie-ins based on the same material. And he's saying this is what happened. So Barsuccini's novel came out, and it looks like 2 more books were, at the very least, commissioned and solicited. The first, planned for an August 96 release, was The Aztec Imperative by James Luceno, and the second was The Doomsday Summit by Thomas Philbin, planned for September 96. You can find entries for both books on Amazon, Goodreads, and more, but there's no evidence that they were actually published. So here's the synopsis for the first one. Ready for this?
Yeah.
The second book in the electrifying new series. While touring an archaeological site near Mexico City, a U.S. senator is suddenly taken hostage by a well-armed band of gunmen. The abduction is masterminded by the brutal leader of a powerful cartel who threatens to kill his captive unless his brother is released from a Miami prison. Now, Ethan Hunt and his IMF team must race against the clock to bring down the deadly drug trafficker before he makes good on his threat.
All right.
So that guy wrote the novelizations for The Shadow and Zorro, and he's done Star Wars tie-ins as well. Then there's less about the other book, but this one has a synopsis as well. Another high-suspense adventure starring the indefatigable Ethan Hunt and his impossible mission team combines high-stakes cases with super tech strategies in a 3rd volume of the series based on the popular blockbuster film. There is no information there. So We don't know what happened. James Swallow says he doesn't know, and he's wondered what happened to these books. Anybody know out there?
Yeah.
Let
Do you
us
have
know.
a galley that you want to share with us?
I don't know if anybody else finds this as fascinating as we do, but
No.
I find this to be fascinating.
This will be episodes of the show. Just keep that in mind. If you have them
Yes.
or know anything about them, just
Yes.
keep that in mind, for better or worse.
I haven't had a chance to reread the novelization, but I've been wanting to do that because I want to see if there are like deleted scenes or something that didn't make it to the movie. Yeah, that's I think that's about it. That's a bizarre distraction. But,
And you also, I mean, we should have talked about this last week because it was so Ghost Protocol heavy, but you found the Diet Coke promotions.
Oh, yes. I posted those on Twitter
Yeah.
and on Instagram. It was the Coke Zero
Coke
promotions of Ghost Protocol.
Yeah, I love that image of the Coke bottle in the Burge or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah.
I don't know how we missed that. We were around and loving the movie and just didn't see it, I guess.
I wonder if it was international or something.
Yeah,
Maybe it wasn't in
that
the
is
States.
sometimes the case. There are really cool Coke bottles that they put out for Rise of Skywalker that actually have a lightsaber on the packaging, like on the bottle.
Really?
Yeah, but they didn't
They didn't do it here.
No.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about.
we never get the cool stuff.
Come on!
So this week we talk about pretty much everything besides Mission Impossible, although we do get his rankings and his hair rankings, which are, I think, surprising.
Yeah.
But great stories about Hunt for Red October, The Abyss, and Star Wars will all be contained within this episode, and we'll be back afterwards to wrap it up.
Yeah. You brought up Hunt for Red October, which you also worked on. We're both very big fans of that movie, so we'd love to hear if anything you could say story-wise from that project if you have time.
Well, that one was we got involved pretty late because it was being done elsewhere, and we got pulled in to get the show back on track and get it done in time.
Oh wow!
So the majority of the shots of the submarines are various scale miniatures. Most of them were about 12 to 16 feet long, and we had these marionette rigs on them so that the submarine was hanging on a bunch of wires from an overhead mechanism that could roll and pitch them under motion control. But basically they were hanging on wires, and we had very dense smoke on the stages where we were shooting them, so you had that limited visibility of being underwater. And you need a lot of space to do that because the miniatures were fairly large, and so we rented a warehouse over in Richmond on the other side of the Richmond Bridge that we called Fruit Bay because it was a refrigerated fruit storage bay. It's a big, basically just a giant warehouse space, and the Loma Prieta earthquake that happened in 1989 happened while we were shooting miniatures over in Fruit Bay, and I wasn't there when the earthquake struck. I was back at the ILM office, but the story I heard was that a bunch of people, when the earthquake hit, dove under the submarine because they were afraid these very thin wires were going to break and the model was going to come crashing down. Unfortunately, no wires broke, and nothing was damaged. But after the earthquake, everybody was very rightly concerned about structural integrity of buildings, and an inspector came out and condemned the building.
Wow.
Basically saying that it's not safe for people to be in this building anymore.
Oh, man.
And we actually got an exception. We got them to let us finish the shoot, which I think only had about 4 weeks left, and we stayed and finished out shooting in that condemned building, and then we wrapped up, pulled out all our equipment, and they tore it down.
Oh, wow. How did you interact a lot with John McTiernan, the director?
No, I was an associate soup on it, so Scott Squires was the main soup.
What about The Abyss?
Yeah, well, I worked worked on that. I went on the shoot with Dennis and Jim Morris, and
you went to the infamous Mexico, or it wasn't Mexico. It was like what?
no,
West
no,
Virginia
that was
or
in
something?
yeah, it was in Gaffney. I forget whether it's North or South Carolina, but
okay.
The old nuclear power plant site that was under construction. They were building it, and I think they ran out of funding, and it never got completed. But there was a big physical plant there, and the base of the cooling tower became the tank that the deep core set was built in, and then there was another building nearby that was going to be where the reactor chamber was going to be, and they used that to shoot various other things, including the miniature submarines and that kind of thing. Yeah, that was a super impressive set. It was amazing.
Yeah, I bet. There's so many movies now. We don't want to keep you too long, but
oh, sorry, I do have another amusing anecdote about from the shoot when. So I was only there for I think we shot all our plates in about 2 weeks or so. So I was only there for that period of time, but I remember shortly after I arrived, I got toured around where everything was being shot, and I looked down into the tank, and down at the bottom of the tank where they were shooting, I saw a bunch of lights and C-stands and a great big studio crane, like a Chapman crane, great big crane, and basically they were just taking pretty standard movie equipment, your C-stands and flags and all that stuff, and the lamps themselves were underwater lamps, but the light stand was a standard movie light stand, and they were just throwing all that stuff in the tank and just using it underwater as you would.
Wow.
But the thing that sort of I thought was hilarious was, wait, that's a studio crane. They're just using it down in the tank. And years later, I was asked to participate in a 20th anniversary panel that the Academy had put together. And I talked to Mikhail Solomon, who was the DP on that. And I asked him, I told him that story about how I saw that presumably it was rental film equipment being used at the bottom of the tank. And I said, did you guys ever tell them when you were renting that crane that you were going to submerge it and use it on the bottom of a tank for 3 months? He went, oh, no, we didn't tell them that.
That's great. You've worked on a lot of Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
You did. I think. Did you start with the special editions of the original trilogy, and then the prequels, and now the recent? I mean, it's a big job, and I feel like you've revolutionized visual effects several times in your career, and that was one of them.
Well, yeah. So my first chance to actually do some work on Star Wars was on the New Hope special edition, and it sort of happened. It was a little bit of a coincidence. What happened was I went by the production office where they were setting up, and I saw storyboards up on the wall of the shots that George had picked to do work on. And originally the way that it had started was George just wanted to do a re-release of the original films, and he had pulled out the negative and made a new print from them. And I saw sections of that print from the negative, and it was kind of shocking because the film had not aged, literally had not aged well. What had happened was, you familiar with what an A/B checkerboard is? Maybe I should explain it. It's that when you cut negative on a film, especially on anamorphic negative, where you're using the entire frame. There's up at the top and bottom of the frame, there's no margin, there's no waste area. So you're seeing literally the entire negative up to where the next frame starts. And so when you're cutting, you can imagine you cut from one shot to another, there's no place to make the splice, right? So what they'll do for when they're cutting negative on an anamorphic project is they'll make two rolls, a roll that's labeled the A roll and another one that's the B roll. And you literally put all the even numbered shots on the A roll and all the odd numbered shots on the B roll, and there's black leader between them. So the splice goes over into the next frame and the black leader so that you never see a splice between them. If that makes sense.
Right.
Right? So now if you imagine that roll all kind of rolled up on a reel, any given piece of negative is going to either have on one side or the other another piece of negative, a piece of black leader, or sandwiched with two pieces of black leader or two pieces of negative. There's all these different combinations. And the scenes where everybody's running around in the Death Star and they're getting pursued by the stormtroopers, there's a lot of laser fire in the sequence. And at the time, those were all opticals that were done from 4-perf negative. And when you do an optical, you're duping the negative to add the laser effects in there. And the negative, the comp is a little grainier than a shot that doesn't have those lasers in it. And so George was concerned at the time that he didn't want the quality, the grain, to keep going from first generation to second generation to back to first. Right. So all the non-effect shots in the sequence got duped so that everything would be at the same generation. And so that was done with a process called a color reversal internegative. And color reversal internegative stock from the 1970s had this unfortunate property that they fade over time. They didn't last very long. And the rate that they fade depends on what's next to them in the roll. So what would happen, the end result of that was that if we struck that print, what you'd see is a shot would come up, and then some number of frames into the shot, the sandwich would have changed, and the shot would suddenly shift a little bit magenta, and then it would shift green again. And that was happening like, it was terrible. Like, oh my God, this is a disaster. This movie is an important historic milestone in our culture, and there's going to have to be a bunch of restoration work to fix this, because we knew, all right, well, everything that had gotten that CRI dupe, George has got the original negative somewhere, so we can find it. And it became apparent that a big restoration project had to happen. And then once the door had been open to there being a restoration, George decided, hey, there's a couple of shots that I really want to recomp because the comps aren't very good. And then the problem becomes, it's like cleaning part of a car. The bumper's really dirty, and you wipe this part off, and now that looks really dirty. And there's no logical place to end it. So so now I go back to going by the production office and seeing what shots had been tagged by George to get redone. And he had about a dozen or so shots that were in the space battle. And as I mentioned earlier on the first mission, I was starting to play around with desktop tools and doing some of these shots just on a Macintosh at home. And looking at some of the space battle shots, I thought, some of these would be well suited to being done with the desktop tools. And I talked to the producer on it about, hey, I'd love to take a crack at a couple of these. And so I did a test. I picked one of the shots and I did a quick test and showed it to George, and he was happy with it. Basically, I got the assignment to do that dozen or so shots, and it ended up expanding to about 30 or so. But the process of doing those shots put me in regular contact with George. I got to know him as part of that, and then just a little bit after that, they were starting to put together the crew for episode 1, and that's sort of how I got that gig.
Wow.
And I'm always going to be very grateful to George about the opportunity I got on doing the prequels. That one, it's a huge project. There were a whole bunch of very difficult challenges to face, but for me, I felt like in a compressed 10-year period, I got a whole career's worth of experience doing those, and it made me a much better soup. That sort of intense 10 years of all of George's crazy ideas. It was amazing.
And
I love George, and I'll forever be grateful for that opportunity.
And I assume he added more shots to that list over time, because didn't he keep kind of redoing the special editions?
Yeah, well, it was the it's the how do you clean part of a car problem.
Right.
That was it. That he would do these shots and he would be really happy with how they turned out, and then he would look at the film and go, yeah, I want to fix that one now too, and that one. There was never any place really to end it.
Right.
I worked a little bit on each of them, but mostly I did the 30 shots or so on New Hope, and a shot. I think I did like 3 shots on Empire Strikes Back, and on Return of the Jedi, I just did that one Celebration and Coruscant shot.
Right.
I thought you were going to tell us you were the one that made all the Ewoks blink, but that was probably someone else. Yeah.
No, there was a whole crew that worked on all of those. My involvement was pretty small.
So this is so insane, but you created Photoshop, which I feel like has gone beyond even just being this amazing program that's changed everything, but also is like a verb in the world. People just, if a photo is doctored or altered, people just say it's Photoshopped. When we interviewed Paul Hirsch, he, I don't know if it was after or before or during the interview, but he told us to ask you where the name Photoshop came from. He said it was a good story or something.
Yeah. Yeah, well, when it first started, so my brothers wrote all the code for it. I wrote some plugins, and I did user interface design, and was essentially the product manager during the development. But when it first started, it didn't do a whole lot. The first version of it could display images in different ways and could read and write a few different formats. And so the first version was just literally called Display. And after a little while, we were adding a bunch of image processing features to it. And my brother Tom came up with Image Pro, which I thought was actually a great name because it's an image processing tools, and it's designed for professionals, so Image Pro. I liked how that sounded. But I'd been going to SIGGRAPH every year since 1987, and I think we'd been calling it Image Pro for a few months, and I was at SIGGRAPH and walking around on the trade show floor, and I saw there was a company that made an image processing suite for, I think, Apollo workstations that was called Image Pro. And this was before the internet, so I couldn't just do a search for names. But so I called Tom and I said, all right, it looks like Image Pro is taken, that somebody else already has a product called Image Pro. And so I suggested Photolab, and so we called it Photolab for a little while. I think it was Photolab for about 6 months. And one of the things I did is, since I live in California, and at the time Tom was living in Ann Arbor, I went and did the rounds. I would go meet with people and do demos, kind of looking for a publisher. And I had a meeting at Electronic Arts where I did a pitch of Photoshop and did the whole demo. It was still called Photolab at the time. And at the end of the demo, they said, all right, what are you calling this thing again? I said, well, right now it's called Photolab. And the guy walked over to a bookshelf about 15 feet away, pulled a box off the shelf that was Deluxe Photolab. And said, well, that name's already taken. So I called Tom and told him, all right, Photolab's taken. They showed me a product that was called Photolab. And he it was a very small, just we'll change one word. He called it Photoshop. And that was fine with me. What we figured was whatever publisher we go with is going to want to brand it themselves anyway. And in fact, about 6 months after that meeting, we ended up doing the deal with Adobe Systems, and Adobe started working on brainstorming new names for it. And I have to admit, I didn't really like any of the names that they were proposing, but they were all failing trademark searches. And finally, they did. Time is marching on. They we're heading towards a release date, and they did a trademark search on Photoshop, and it passed. And we'd already been beta testing now. It had been out in the world with various testers, and word started getting out that Adobe was developing this amazing image processing application called Photoshop, or codename Photoshop. So word started getting out, and I think there was some article in Macworld magazine about what to watch for next year, and finally Adobe felt like, all right, well, Macworld has named it for us. The word is out. So there was a temporary name that basically stuck because they couldn't find something else that passed the trademark search. So there you go. That's why it's Photoshop.
Wow. Paul Hirsch was right. It is a good story. Well, I think we should probably wrap it up. I imagine you have a million things to do today. But we just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. This was pretty amazing.
We also have to ask him the two important questions.
Yes, I do have to ask you the most important
questions.
questions.
Yes.
We ask every guest.
All right, first, let's go easy. Can you rank your favorite to least favorite, or the other way around, Tom Cruise hairstyles in the Mission Impossible films?
Oh,
Are you a short guy? Or are you a long guy?
I prefer short hair myself, as you can see. It's too much work otherwise. I don't want to think about that.
But on Tom Cruise...
On Tom Cruise?
He's willing to do the work. He'll put in the work for that long hair.
I don't know. I'm still a short hair guy.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's good. So that means, have we found we're fans of the first movie's haircut, and it doesn't seem like there are a lot of fans of them out there. So that means you would be a fan then.
Absolutely.
Okay. We are
few.
Okay. All right. So now you're we want you to rank all the movies. From your maybe least favorite to favorite or whatever.
I have to admit, one of my favorites is 3 that I didn't work on. That's a good one. I like 4 a lot too. Probably I have good memories working with Brad. I think that was great, and I think the film turned out well. And I'll always have a soft spot for 1 because it was the first one, and we were kind of figuring out how it should work as a cinematic franchise. I'll admit, not a huge fan of 2. We did that. We did a couple of mask pull-off shots that on 1 that I think had good dramatic value when they happen and how they're used dramatically, and the film pays off pretty well. But it seemed like they went a little mask crazy on 2.
That is literally the phrase we use, the mask crazies. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. Well, and
5 and 6, we gotta.
5 and 6. Oh God, this is so embarrassing. I've seen them both, but remember the 6 had the helicopter chase in it. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
I like that. And 5 was always hanging off the side of the cargo plane as it's taken off.
Yeah.
Pretty great.
I think,
they're all pretty great.
Yeah. Oh, I like them all. They're all a lot of fun. I'll say
you just give us a top 3. That's okay.
3, 4, 1 would be my
your ranking.
Top tier.
Okay.
Top 3. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Will you, without saying anything, you think you'll be reuniting with Mr. Bird in the not too distant future?
I don't know. I'm not sure what he's working on next.
Okay.
I mean, I still hope that 1906 will come back, and that if it does, I can be part of it. I love that idea, and I like Brad a lot. I would work with him again any day.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
and we love your work that you've been doing on The Mandalorian and more to come, right?
Yep, we're season 2 shooting now.
That's awesome.
Can't wait. Well, thank you, John Knoll, for accepting this mission. It meant a lot to us as being fans of yours for quite some time.
Yeah, we've been hoping to get you on the show for a long time. This is a real thrill.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you.
I hate to say goodbye, John Knoll.
Hate to say it.
If the rumors are true, and he is back for 7 and 8, I think we will be talking to him again.
That's true.
And we've got another really exciting interview in the works with one of his coworkers that we're hoping will come through in the next few weeks.
Hopefully that will happen.
Another legend who we don't want to say anything about, but has ties to the franchise, and I love getting all the visual effects people's perspectives on these movies.
Yeah, we've got a really interesting perspective from another person we've interviewed that I don't want to say because we haven't quite figured out what our order is depending on who we get in our interviews in the next couple of weeks. But a really fascinating perspective from this guy who had wonderful stories. Who worked on? Did he work on 3 also? Yeah, he worked on 3, 4, 5, and 6. Mm-hmm. So 4 different Mission Impossible movies, which I don't think we've had before.
No.
I mean, technically McQuarrie now, I guess, has done that. But, so anyway, it's gonna, some really great interviews coming up. You're going to be very happy to hear.
Yeah.
As always, please rate, write reviews, and subscribe wherever you're listening. Our podcast is available all manner of however you listen to podcasts.
Yes.
And
also let us know what you want. If you want something special. We've been talking about doing maybe some video things. I mean, if we ever get to London, we're definitely going to shoot some stuff. I feel like we have to do some kind of walking tour or something.
Right.
Anything that you think that you want us to cover or you want to hear about or an angle that you want us to investigate.
Yeah. I know people have asked for the video games. We're going to do an episode about video games soon.
We've got to get the systems.
I know. It's hard. I don't know if we can get all those systems. We might just have to talk about them.
We have enough shit littering our respective apartments.
Yeah. And then we also have a comic books episode we'll do. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot to talk about with Mission Impossible. So stay tuned. You will hear it soon. And as our 100th episode will be something special as well.
Yeah, buy a T-shirt too, TeePublic.
Yes, please buy a T-shirt from our TeePublic page, which is linked from our website, LightTheFuse-podcast.com.
Mm-hmm.
Go to our Patreon and subscribe for bonus content there. That's patreon.com/LightTheFuse. We've done all kinds of interviews. We give bonus minutes of stuff. We did a whole episode that's almost an hour about our best movies of the decade. Mm-hmm. We did one about best movies of 2019. We've done all kinds of stuff you'll find on there. So please sign up for the Patreon if you're interested. If you want more of us babbling,
which oddly some people do.
And what else?
Watch your movie.
Oh, sure, yeah. Watch my movie. It's a nasty piece of work on Hulu.
We talk about it on the Patreon?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we did a bonus episode about nasty piece of work. You interviewed me. It was the first time that you've ever interviewed me. It was kind of odd.
Yeah, it was only on the morally nebulous side of things can I interview Charles. I have to, we have to keep church and state separate.
Yes,
but it was fun.
Yeah, and if you don't care for dark comedy Christmas thing, then watch my movie Night Owls on Amazon Prime.
Oh, is it on there? Free for streamers?
Yeah, it's been on there. I've said that here before. You just don't ever listen to me.
Care.
But also buy Drew's book, The Art of Onward. You just went to the Onward premiere.
I went to the Onward premiere. Yeah, it should be out it'll be out by now.
I think it should be.
It's on Amazon. It's a really great, beautiful book great photos. Great images from the movie, and don't read it until after you see the movie. But the movie's great. You're gonna
the movie's been out now for a week or so you've probably seen it, hopefully.
Yeah.
And you loved the movie, right? You said
I loved it. I was so happy to see it finished, and it came a long way in the last year since I last watched it. So It's really beautiful. It's just like every great Pixar movie, great story, great characters, emotional, beautiful looking.
I can't wait. I got that Pixar tour and they were showing me the artwork for it, and I was just cracking up looking at all the really detailed and background
jokes.
So many jokes. It was so great.
Things that you'll pick up on. But if you want to know what didn't make it into the movie and what went into it, get the book.
Well, you interview
Dan Scanlon. And Kelsey Mann, who's the head of story, and a lot of people. Yeah.
I'm going to interview you on the Patreon about this. So we still have to do that
you have to watch
episode.
the movie.
Maybe by now that'll be out for our Patreon subscribers. So stay tuned. We got great stuff coming up.
Yeah.
And we will. We'll be
is this sponsored by anybody?
Oh yeah, of course. Jeez, thank you so much, Drew. This episode is brought to you by Jeremy Dillon, and it was mixed and edited by Luke Burson. And
two people who we literally could not do this podcast without.
Yes, this is absolutely true. So thank you, and thank you to all our other Patreon subscribers and all you listeners out there. Anyone who rates, reviews, subscribe, we love you. Thank you.
Yes, we'll be back next week.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. And before we go, another mission, should you choose to accept it. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. And remember that you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LightTheFusePod and email us questions or comments at lightthefusepodcasts@gmail.com. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.